Hey kids, and welcome to this week's lesson. I hope you guys are all doing well and you're all keeping safe and you've been enjoying this nicer weather that we've been having. I hope on the cool days you've been able to go outside and run around maybe a bit more than normal. And on the hot days you're able to stay cool so you have your energy and you don't feel all gross and sweaty and sticky. That's just not fun. Yeah, and with that, let's do a little recap of what we've been learning about. So, over the past few weeks, we've been learning some of my favorite Bible stories. And right now, or at least today's lesson, will be the fourth week of learning about my favorite stories. So, as you might remember, we've looked at a few different Bible stories. And we looked at why I like them and what we can learn from them and about God. So the first week, if you remember, we talked about Moses and him parting the Red Sea. Pretty cool. The second week, we looked at the story of David and Goliath. Also another pretty cool story. And last week, we looked at the story of Daniel and his friends following God's instructions and not eating the other foods. Again, a pretty cool story. Now, throughout all these weeks, we've learned that God is there with us, even when it seems like he's a little far away. And we also learned that when we trust God and follow him and follow his rules, he will be there for us and he will help us, which is kind of cool. And again, it's a theme that we've been seeing, and it's not something that I intentionally planned. So that's pretty cool. So this week, our story comes from the New Testament. The other previous stories all came from the Old Testament. And today, we'll be looking at the story of Jesus walking on water. Now, before we start with today's story, I want you guys to think about a time where you went swimming. Speaking of swimming, that's where Henry is today, so unfortunately, he won't be able to enjoy us, but I imagine he's having a good time splashing around in a pool wherever he went. But back to my question. Think about a time you went swimming, and if you have been swimming in a swimming pool, you know it's kind of impossible to walk on water, and when you try, your foot just sinks into the water, and then you just sink with your foot until you touch the bottom of that pool. It's really, really difficult, and it's impossible to walk on water without using some sort of platform or having something there to keep you afloat, which isn't really walking on water. You're just floating. This story of Jesus walking on water is recorded 3 different times in the New Testament. And to me, that says that this is kind of a pretty important story and one that is worth reading a few times, maybe. I'm going to leave that up to you. So, this story happens after Jesus had just finished teaching and feeding a group of over 5,000 people, which is a lot of people. It's kind of hard to imagine that, but imagine the Meridian Center downtown in St. Catharines. I'm sure that holds a few thousand people. Imagine maybe 2 or 3 of those arenas just full of people listening to Jesus talk and then being fed by passing out bread and fish, which is a lot of bread and fish you need. But anyways, back to the story. So the story happens after Jesus is done teaching and feeding those 5,000 people. And when Jesus was done, he instructed his disciples to get in a boat and sail across the sea while Jesus went up on a side of a mountain nearby or the side of a hill nearby. And he was going to just pray and spend some time with God the Father. So the disciples did as he did, and Jesus went to pray. So once Jesus was done praying, the boat was already at sea and a long way gone. And while the boat was at sea, Jesus began to approach the boat by walking on the water, which is pretty cool. And the disciples who were keeping watch during this time, because it was a little dark, it was a little windy, so they just wanted to make sure that they didn't run into anyone or anything. Some of Jesus' disciples saw Jesus, but they didn't recognize it was Jesus, and they became afraid and terrified, shouting out, "Who's there?" or "Who are you?" or things along those lines. They were a little scared. But fortunately for them, Jesus told them it was him, and that kind of calmed their fears and made them less tense and a little more relaxed. So Peter, who you may know as one of Jesus' disciples, and a pretty, he's a bit of a character. We'll go with that. So he asks if he could walk on the water, and Jesus replies with, "Come." So Peter, he does. He gets out of the boat and begins to walk on the water. But then the wind kind of picks up a little and it becomes a little stronger, and he becomes terrified and he begins to look around, taking his eyes off Jesus. And at that point, he began to sink into the water, which would have been scary from going right above it to right in it. It's not a great feeling, I'd imagine. But Jesus was able to reach out, grab Peter's hand, and pull him up out of the water, saving him, and they returned to the boat together. That's pretty much how the story goes. Now, this is a pretty cool story, if you ask me. See, we get to see Jesus do something that is impossible for us to do, no matter how hard we try. If we've read the Bible and if we've talked about the Bible a lot, we know that Jesus is fully God and fully human. And in this story, we get to see kind of that fully God side of Jesus as he demonstrates this really cool sign of walking on water. Now, it's also pretty cool to imagine what it would be like walking on water. I think it would kind of be like walking on ground, but like you'd be as stable as you walk on ground because you really don't lean or fall or anything. But I imagine walking on water, it'd be a little cold on the feet, maybe just a touch. And then it might be similar to walking on ground, or like a bit of a foam padded surface where it's a little squishy and has a little bounce. It's hard to imagine because, again, we can't do that. And this is one of my favorite stories because we get to see that fully God side of Jesus. And it's just a really cool story to tell and to hear. And it's one of those stories that makes you go, whoa, that's so awesome. So from this story, we also learn that when we trust Jesus and not get distracted or scared by the world around us, and we keep our focus on him, we can do impossible things. Impossible things like walking on water, which maybe we'll be able to do that someday. Who knows? And this idea of being able to trust Jesus and not get distracted or scared of what's around us also ties us back to the story of David and Goliath, where we learned that when we trust God and have faith in God, God can make impossible things happen, or can make it so that what seems impossible is very possible, which is pretty cool if you ask me. All right, I'm going to pray, and you guys can get on with your day. Let's bow together and pray. Dear God, we thank you for today, and we thank you for the story of Jesus walking on water, and that we can learn to trust in him and keep our focus on him so that he can help us accomplish so many things, things that seem impossible and things that might not be too difficult. We thank you for Jesus being there to also reach out and grab us when we need his help. So we thank you for all that, and we pray this in your name. Amen. All right, kids, you take care, and I'll see you around.